Improve your glucose levels by 33% from today. Too good to be true? Let's jump in and take a look. Hey everybody, Mark Green here, the Diabetes Diet Guy, bringing you all things diabetes and healthy living. In this video, I'm going to show you a simple trick. Well, we call it a trick, it does require some work, but a way to improve your glucose levels significantly by just changing a few things and looking at things slightly differently. Now, when we're talking about time in target, this is something that we have gained access to with the advent of glucose sensors like the Freestyle Libre 2 or continuous glucose monitors like the Dexcom. And typically, the glucose target will be between 4 and 10, and it tells you how often you're between that range. A good level is usually 70% or above. Doesn't mean if you're below that actually you're doing badly. It just means there might be room for improvement. If you're above that quite frequently, that over a long term can increase the risk of complications. And obviously we're always keen to avoid hypos, so we don't want too many hypos throughout the day either. Now, when you see your glucose levels being plotted, it will look something like this. Now, just to give you some context, this is 8 a.m., this is 8 p.m. Now, one of the things I see with my patients is they are always focused on the sort of trophy parts of the graph which seem more obvious for them to look at. So let's say glucose levels ticking along overnight, and then they have breakfast, big old spike, comes back, and then for the rest of the day, it looks something like this. Now, a patient that comes to see me will usually say, and rightly so because it's the most obvious part of the graph, I really have problems controlling my glucose levels after breakfast. Now, I've done videos on this in the past, which I'll link to on our type 1 diabetes program about how to analyze these and actually what to think about. But the part that they're focusing on really isn't a huge amount of time because they're getting this glucose spike here and it's lasting about 4 hours. Now, what you can see is that actually the glucose levels almost come back to where they started in the first instance. Now, what they're not focusing on and what a lot of patients don't focus on is this time period and this time period. Essentially, when you're asleep and go into bed. So this is going to be about between 6 and 8 hours a day, so a good third of the day, where we can optimize glucose levels and get basically free time in target. So for me, for any patient that I'm dealing with, this is the area I want to work on first. Can we get these glucose targets in range so we're getting free time in target? Because if we can reduce these so that this line actually now exists in target before the spike, actually we've just significantly increased your time in target for nothing. You're not even awake, you're not even thinking about it. Now, one of the reasons that people struggle to do this is because what they'll find is this evening meal here, they eat something and they get their dose slightly out, and then that knocks them out for the rest of the night. So they're going into the evening high, and then they might actually just tick along all night above target. So for me, if you can then start to think about putting in correction doses kind of around this area, I appreciate some people might be slightly apprehensive about trying to correct glucose levels when the next thing they're going to do is go to bed, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to completely leave it. So you could give yourself a micro correction, and actually even if you just reduce the glucose levels ever so slightly, you might not be in target, but you've actually improved your overall glucose control for a significant amount of the day without doing anything extra. And then as time goes by, you can start to try and fine tune this area here. And certain strategies would be carb counting strictly, so you find out exactly how many carbs you're having, and then applying your carbohydrate ratio to that to see how well it's working. And then you can see, because rapid insulin lasts about 4 hours, what the effect 4 hours later is after you've taken your dose. Usually, if after 4 hours your glucose levels come back to where they started, it means that you've given about the right dose. If they come in much further down, it's too much, and if they're stopping short and not coming back to where you started, it means probably that you're giving too little insulin. So that's a really nice way that we can start to assess our insulin to carb ratios. Ideally do this without taking a correction dose because then you can get a clean look at it. If you're adding in a correction dose, then obviously that starts to complicate matters because you don't know how much of the insulin was for the carb and how much was for the correction. And you can apply the same principle to a correction dose. If you take a correction dose when you're not eating, or you miss a meal, or you fast, or you have a low carb meal, then you can get a pretty good look at how much a unit of insulin will drop your glucose levels. So we're trying to separate out these two things so then we can analyze how well our ratios are working for us. Then once we know how well our ratios are working for us, and we're absolutely convinced the carbohydrates we're having at that meal are actually correct, then you can see that these glucose lines will start to improve because you'll be correcting appropriately and you'll be taking the right insulin for the food that you're taking. So you won't get these trends up like this. In fact, hopefully you'll start to bring them back down into target over the course of the night. One other thing just to think about is your background insulin. And again, this is something I've talked about before, but if you're seeing big crashes in your glucose levels overnight, it might mean that, yes, it is ideal at the time because you're going from high to low with your glucose levels overnight, so it brings you back into target. But that's not ideal because should you go to bed with a lower glucose level, you're at a very big hypo risk. So a good way to think about those background insulin levels is, can you go to bed with a glucose level of 7 and still wake up without hypoing? I don't know if you can hear the ice cream van driving in the background. If you can, I'm going to be shooting off for an ice cream in a minute. If you can't, then ignore this entirely. Anyway, so guys, that's just a quick thing to think about. And when we talk about these strategies, these are just simple, quick things to talk about. I know it's easy for me to stand here and say it, but almost just focusing on this kind of thing can bring you a lot closer to achieving it. Because for me, this is where I'm focusing first. And once we got this down, we can start to think about this later and improve this, because this isn't having a huge impact on your overall control, but these two areas are. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. If you did, subscribe and like. It helps us out, gets us up the YouTube algorithm, and of course, lets you know when we publish more videos. So I'll leave it there, and I'll see you later. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you need an extra helping hand, make sure you check out our Type 1 Diabetes program here on YouTube or at diabetesdietguide.com. If you need an extra helping hand to get on top of your glucose levels, we do offer consultancy services where we'll work with you to help you get on top of things and put some of the strategies we talk about on the channel in place in the context of your own life. Anyway guys, we'll leave it there and we will see you later.